Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, I just really want to take a moment to thank you for joining us today. We understand that these are uncertain times, and we appreciate all of the families and professionals who are stepping up right now and who are working hard every day, not just in times of crisis, to continue to support the people that we serve and ensure their health and safety. We hope everyone's doing well and staying healthy. My name is Sarah, and I'm the Director of Outreach at NYSARC Trust Services. NYSARC Trust Services is a nonprofit organization that administers pooled supplemental needs trusts and serves all counties of New York State. NYSARC Inc., which is now known as the ARC New York, established NYSARC Trust Services in 1972, which really expanded its mission by allowing us to provide trust administration services to people with any type of disability and not just people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. NYSARC provides this free webinar series to help educate people, families, and professionals about protecting benefit eligibility for people with disabilities. This is the final webinar in our series this year, and we are beginning to prepare the topics for the coming year. So we do encourage you to send me a note or respond in the comments if you have any ideas or topics you'd like us to cover in the future. We are in the process of putting together that calendar right now. Following today's presentation, you will receive an email with a link to complete a brief survey. We ask that you please take a few minutes just to provide us with some feedback about this webinar. Your input is greatly appreciated and will help us continue to refine this material for future presentations. You will find copies of today's PowerPoint slides along with a couple of other handouts. Those are located in the handouts area of the toolbar, the GoToWebinar toolbar. I encourage you to go there now to download the copy if you'd like to follow along. You do need to be sure that you download those handouts prior to the close of today's webinar. Once the webinar does close, you will no longer be able to access those. However, our contact information will be included throughout, and you can always reach out to me to get copies. Everyone is muted by default, so we encourage you to use the questions feature in the toolbar to submit questions throughout the presentation. We will be holding all questions to review in the last 30 minutes of today's webinar. This webinar will also be recorded, so if you have any additional questions after today's presentation or you'd like a copy of the recording, please feel free to contact us. So the goal of today's webinar is to provide you with an overview of special needs trusts and introduce the concept of ABLE accounts as another way to help people with disabilities protect funds while maintaining their eligibility for the vital means-tested government benefits that we know that they rely on day in and day out to provide the services that they need. We'll explore the different types of special needs trusts to help you identify the right trust in each situation and review what trust can pay for. We'll discuss the importance of choosing a trustee and present some best practices to help you in selecting the right fit for the individual that you may be working with or for your loved one. We'll also review how to establish a trust and present some scenarios to help you determine when you may consider creating a trust. So the challenge is that people with disabilities who utilize Medicaid and or supplemental security income benefits, or who may need these benefits later in life, they can only have a certain amount of money in their name in order to qualify financially for these programs. A special needs trust, which is also commonly referred to as a supplemental needs trust or an SNT, is a special type of trust that is allowable under state and federal regulations. This is an irrevocable trust that is designed to manage funds for the benefit of a person with a disability, to allow that individual to protect funds while maintaining their eligibility for these vital means-tested government benefits. such as Medicaid and supplemental security income benefits. A special needs trust can play a critical role in helping people with disabilities be able to receive the best quality of life possible by allowing them to not only save for the future and protect benefit, but also to protect their benefit eligibility without having to forego any money or assets that they may be entitled to, or having to spend down funds when they receive an unexpected windfall of money. SNTs can be used by parents who may be looking to plan for the future of a loved one or other family members as well, so that they're able to provide the means for their loved one to purchase life-enhancing items and services that go above and beyond what their Medicaid or supplemental security income benefits may provide. It also allows individuals with a disability to protect their own money. If they receive funds or property of some kind directly, that could put their benefits at risk. The reason that this is so important is that the alternative to using an SNT is that the family either cannot leave funds to their loved one, or perhaps they may leave those funds to another family member in hopes that that family member will do right by the person with a disability and use that money for their benefit. And it also, the alternative, if the individual is receiving the funds directly, may be that they're forced to spend those funds as quickly as possible just to be able to maintain their benefit eligibility. By using an SNT, that person is able to shelter the money so that it can be used over a period of time to enhance their quality of life over the years, rather than being spent down quickly. Though with very modest sums of money, there are certainly situations where the individual may benefit from spending down the funds quickly on something that they may need. As long as it's for an appropriate expense, that may be a good idea in certain situations. A special needs trust can also kind of provide some assistance with the management of the funds. The trustee has a legal obligation to, ensure that the funds are used appropriately and to enhance the quality of life of the person with a disability. And so oftentimes it can be helpful to have a special needs trust there to assist your loved one in not only managing the funds, but with larger sums of money, also potential opportunity for those funds to grow over time to support the needs of people with disabilities throughout their life. Now, in order to set up a special needs trust, there are 3 parties that you need in order to create a trust. The first is the individual who will be funding the trust, which is the donor or the grantor. And this can be funded with money or real property. The second is the trust beneficiary, the individual who will benefit from the assets in the trust. And finally, you need a trustee who would be the person, or in some cases, it may be a professional or an entity that is responsible for managing the assets in the trust, preparing tax filing, and distributing the funds to improve the quality of life of the trust beneficiary in accordance with the terms of the trust agreement. Now, there are different types of special needs trusts, and the biggest difference is really where the money or the assets are coming from. A third-party trust is going to be funded by someone other than the trust beneficiary, usually a parent or a grandparent who is planning in advance to secure a better financial future for their loved one. You can also have a first-party trust where it's the individual's own money. Oftentimes that might be coming from a retroactive benefits payment, maybe a settlement from a lawsuit, or a direct inheritance that they may have received. Basically, it's a situation where it's their own money that needs to be sheltered so that they are able to maintain their eligibility for benefits. And there are also 2 main ways that a trust can be structured. You can create an S&T on your own with the assistance of a legal professional. We're going to kind of refer to this as an individual trust throughout today's presentation, where in this particular situation, an attorney needs to draft the trust document, and you would choose a trustee to manage the assets. There are also pooled trusts. These are the types of trusts that NYSARC primarily administered, where you have a not-for-profit organization that is serving as the trustee to administer the funds in the account to make purchases for the beneficiary. The pooled trust already has documents in place that govern the trust, therefore an attorney does not need to draft the trust, and this can make a pooled trust very inexpensive and easy to establish quickly. And we'll discuss the benefits and kind of limitations of each of these options as we go into more detailed examples throughout today's presentation. So whenever we're talking to families or professionals or anyone who may be considering putting funds into a special needs trust, one of the main questions that we get is, well, how can I use the money in the trust? An S&T is a tool that allows an individual to protect funds to then be used for their benefit. The trustee of the trust will distribute the funds to pay for eligible items and services that are for the primary benefit of the trust beneficiary. The main rule about how money in an S&T can be used is that the money has to be used for the primary benefit of the trust beneficiary, and that it can only pay for things that the government benefits don't provide. So what that means is that if someone receives Medicaid, the trust money can't be used to pay for the types of medical services that they may be receiving through Medicaid. Or if they receive SSI, supplemental security income benefits, those benefits are intended to be used to pay for food and housing. Therefore, if the money in the trust is used, cannot be used to pay for food and housing without potentially impacting their eligibility for those SSI benefits. However, beyond that, the money can really be used for so many things. And there's a lot more that the trust funds can be used for that it cannot be used for. However, the trust typically cannot give cash to the beneficiary directly without impacting their eligibility for benefits. If the individual could shelter the funds in the trust and we could just turn around and give the funds right back to them, that would not actually protect their eligibility for benefits. So typically, the trustee is going to pay third parties for items and services directly. And that may be to pay a business directly, like a landlord or a utility company, or perhaps Amazon for a purchase that someone made. It could also be to reimburse someone other than the trust beneficiary who may go out and make a purchase for that individual and submit receipts to the trust, and the trust would reimburse that individual that made that purchase on behalf of the trust beneficiary. The trust can pay for so many things, but not all requests can be paid in order to comply with the benefit rules and regulations. Everyone's situation is pretty unique, and things really change based on the amount of money they may have in the trust, what services that they're receiving, and what their benefits are supposed to be providing. A lot of times the things the trust is being used for are things like uncovered medical expenses, could be assistive technologies, could also be things that are purely life enhancing, such as recreation, like music classes, perhaps therapies that aren't covered by Medicaid. Really anything that's for the specific individual is going to enhance their quality of life. So it's really very unique to the individual. And when you're considering setting up an S&T, I'd encourage you to think about how you or your loved one or the person that you might be working with would want the money to be used. What are some of the needs of the trust beneficiary now? What may they need in the future? Will they be working, going to school, living independently, perhaps in a supportive setting? What is that like? What does that your loved one's life look like now? And what do you want to see, or what do they have as far as goals for their future. The main rule is that these funds are intended to enrich the quality of life of a person with a disability by paying for things that their benefits do not provide, and again, are for their sole benefit, which usually means also that we cannot buy gifts or expenses for other people. This is for the protection of the beneficiary, to ensure that if Medicaid and Social Security Administration is allowing this individual to set aside this money without it impacting their eligibility for benefits, they want to ensure that the funds are truly being used for that person's sole benefit. And that is really where the trustee comes in to be sure that it is monitoring transactions and making sure that that's happening. So here's an example where we have an individual, Joe, who's 26 years old, and he has Asperger's. He receives supplemental security income benefits and Medicaid to support his daily living needs. So he can never have more than $2,000 in his name without causing some interruption in his SSI benefits. Joe's grandmother has a modest estate, and she would like to leave him $50,000 without putting his benefits at risk. She is able to use an S&T to direct these funds from her estate, and so that his inheritance is protected and can be used for things that he wants or needs that his benefits don't provide. Things like those uncovered therapies we were just talking about, perhaps going to take some music lessons or art classes, perhaps other life-enhancing or recreational things that Joe would like to do, since the majority of his day-to-day needs are being met through the Medicaid and SSI benefits that he receives. So third-party special needs trusts are commonly used by people who are planning in advance for a loved one with a disability, who either has benefits now or they anticipate this individual may need benefits later in life. This allows a third party to be able to gift money or real property to a person with a disability while continuing to preserve their eligibility for these vital means tested benefits. Third-party trusts are typically established by a parent or grandparent, but it really can be any third party, any other relative, a friend, for the benefit of a person with a disability. And most commonly, when families are planning to set up third-party special needs trusts, they're setting these up as a testamentary trust, meaning that the trust will be funded upon their death with things such as proceeds from their estate, like the inheritance that they would like to leave to a loved one, maybe the benefit from a life insurance policy or other assets that they may have to leave to an individual. But it can also be established during that donor's lifetime. If a family has money now that they'd like to start setting aside for a loved one with a disability, they're able to work with an attorney to draft up an irrevocable trust agreement and establish the trust during their lifetime. In that way, the parent may be able to be pretty involved with the trust and kind of getting things set up so that they are comfortable with that process and can transition the trust over to successor trustees once they are no longer able to continue to manage that for their loved one. We really talk about timing of when is a good time to set up a trust. I think it's important to point out that it's really very unique to an individual situation, whether or not family has money now or if they believe they might have it later in life. But we always want to encourage families to just consider as early as possible, because early planning is so critical. Even a small inheritance could impact your loved one's eligibility for benefits. We encourage families to consider putting a third-party trust in their will. This really ensures that if money is left to your loved one, there's no concern that it could impact their eligibility for benefits. And even if it's only a modest amount of money, an S&T can offer families the peace of mind that if something happens unexpectedly, your loved one can receive what they're entitled to from your estate without putting their benefits at risk or forcing them to have to spend down those funds as quickly as possible in order to maintain their benefit eligibility. So a third-party trust, to go and establish a trust, family is going to work with a legal professional to draft up either a trust document if they're setting it up during their lifetime, or perhaps assisting them with their estate planning to put a trust in their will. The family will need to select an appropriate individual or entity to serve as the trustee of the trust. And it's important to point out as we continue on and we start talking about the first party trusts, because this third party trust is established with funds or assets that do not belong to the person with a disability who is receiving the Medicaid services, when the beneficiary of the trust does pass away, if there are funds left in that account, those funds can go to potential other remainder beneficiaries as outlined in the trust document, because there is not a requirement to reimburse the states for the Medicaid services that were provided to that individual. And that's because it is another person's money that funded that trust and not the individual who's receiving the Medicaid services. And that can be a benefit of using a third-party trust, as opposed to, and planning early and making sure that those funds go into a third-party trust, as opposed to that inheritance perhaps going to the loved one directly, where they then need to establish a first-party trust, which funds would be subject to a payback provision. So here we have an example of a situation where an individual may consider setting up a first-party trust to protect a lump sum payment. Mary was disabled at birth and she is entitled to receive a large settlement from a lawsuit when she turns 18. Her parents have done a lot to think about what her needs are now and what she may need in the future, and they do intend to apply for benefits to be able to provide the necessary supports and services so that their hope is that she'll be able to live independently in the community. When she turns 18 and receives those funds, that could potentially cause her to either lose those benefits or be ineligible to apply for those benefits. So by depositing the proceeds from that settlement into a first-party trust, the family is able to protect those funds so that she can use that money to pay for uncovered medical expenses and life-enhancing purchases that her benefits don't provide, while allowing her to still be able to qualify and maintain eligibility for those means-tested benefits. So a first-party individual trust is a trust that allows a person with a disability who's under the age of 65 to protect funds that they either receive or may be entitled to receive that would otherwise impact their eligibility for benefits. So in this situation, a first-party trust is going to be used when a person comes into a sum of money that they need to spend down to avoid causing any sort of interruption in their benefits. And in this case, this makes the person with the disability not only the beneficiary of the trust, but also the donor, the person that's funding the trust, because the trust is being funded with money or assets that belong to a person with a disability. A first-party S&T can be used to shelter excess resources and or income up to the age of 65. Once the individual is over the age of 65, they can continue to utilize a first-party individual trust that they may have in their name, but any future deposits would need to go into a pooled trust. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail when we get into the discussion about pooled trusts. These trusts are most commonly being funded with things like a direct inheritance. It may be settlement proceeds from a lawsuit, and it's important to point out that a trust may be funded with a lump sum lawsuit. It may also be a structured settlement where the trust is receiving regular payments to spend down those funds. We're also often see a lot of individuals who are receiving retroactive Social Security award benefit payments, where a parent either goes on Social Security benefits or passes away, and the individual with a disability is able to collect on that parent's work record and access things like disabled adult child benefits, which can often cause accruals of funds that may require someone to be spending down resources or other assets on a regular basis. Similar to the third-party trust, the individual trust does need an attorney to draft an irrevocable trust document. In this case, there is a document that needs to be created because the trust is being created today to be able to shelter those funds so that the individual is able to maintain their eligibility for benefits. And just like the third-party individual trust we were just speaking about, the individual or the family do need to select an appropriate person to serve as trustee. When you are establishing the trust agreement, if the disabled individual does not have the capacity to create the trust themselves, it is important to point out that there are others who can establish the trust on behalf of the person with a disability, as long as they have the legal authority to do so. And this is currently those that are able to do this are a parent or a grandparent. It may also be a legal guardian or an agent acting under power of attorney that has the proper authority to establish and fund a trust on behalf of the beneficiary. Since you do need an attorney to draft an irrevocable trust agreement, these individual trusts are often somewhat more expensive to set up and maintain compared to some other options. However, the family gets the benefit of having a little bit more freedom in being involved in that drafting process, to be able to put in terms of your own, and also to select your own trustee to manage the assets. Unlike a third-party trust, because the funds that are being used to establish a first-party trust belong to the person with a disability, there is a payback provision that the states that provided Medicaid services on behalf of the individual do have the right to lay claim to any funds that may be left in a first-party trust upon the passing of the trust beneficiary. In the case of an individual trust, if there is a large balance left in the trust, the states that provided Medicaid services are able to recoup an amount up to the amount of services that were provided. If there are funds left over after that, it may be able to be distributed to other remainder beneficiaries as outlined in the trust agreement. So in talking about setting up first and third-party trusts, it's on your own, I think it's really important that we take a moment to talk about selecting a trustee and what does it mean to be a trustee, and what are some of the responsibilities that a trustee is required to do, along with some best practices that might help you when considering who you might select to serve as trustee of a special needs trust. The trustee has a fiduciary responsibility to the trust beneficiary, and the trustee that you choose is the legal owner of the trust assets, which does mean that the trust beneficiary cannot be their own trustee. So whomever you choose to serve as trustee, keep in mind that they are going to have a legal responsibility to ensure that the trust is administered appropriately and efficiently in court, according to the state and federal rules and regulations. And some examples of some of the responsibilities of serving as trustee include the day-to-day management of those assets. This is the individual person, or perhaps it may be a professional or an organization, like a trust officer, who is managing the assets in the trust, working directly with the beneficiary and the family to ensure that bills are being paid, and managing the overall operation of the trust, maintaining regular communication with the family. Obviously, you know, the goal of these trusts is that once the money is deposited, that it's used efficiently over time to provide as much benefit throughout someone's life as possible. And someone's needs over that period of time will probably change significantly. So you want to be working with someone who is going to communicate regularly with the beneficiary to understand their needs, so that they can make appropriate distributions that not only don't impact their eligibility for benefits, but are also appropriate to meet the needs of the individual and also just the desires of that individual. The trustee is responsible for collecting all of the documentation of each transaction out of the trust, so that they're able to report to the appropriate agencies as needed. For larger sums of money that may be deposited into a trust, those funds are often invested, and therefore the trustee is responsible for being responsible in those investment strategies to help maintain the trust assets over that period of time, to be able to enhance that quality of life of the individual over many years. And they are also responsible for preparing tax filings and other statements and accountings to report to the appropriate agencies as needed. Choosing a trustee to manage the funds in a special needs trust can often be a difficult decision. A trustee can be a family member or a trusted friend, but can also be a professional, such as a lawyer, perhaps a trust company, or a bank can also serve as trustee, or maybe some other professional trustee that provides exclusively trustee services. It is really important that you consider choosing successor trustees, so that there is someone to serve if your first choice is no longer able to at some point. Similar to when parents are looking at guardianship as an potential for an individual, they're going to want to ensure that they not only have a primary guardian in place, but also others who can step in if that individual is no longer able to provide that service. A lot of people want a family member to serve as trustee, and I think that that can work really well in a lot of situations, and many times that really is the best option. But it's important to have a real frank conversation with whomever you're considering about what it means to be a trustee. The person who serves as trustee really needs to be knowledgeable in the benefits, someone that is extremely trustworthy to manage the funds appropriately, and be due diligent in ensuring that they're used appropriately and will be available over many years to enhance the quality of life of the trust beneficiary. The individual needs to really understand the rules about government benefits and how the money in the trust can be used without affecting those benefits, which these rules are often changing. So it is something that, you know, it's not just a learn it and you're good to go. They're going to need to keep up on these rules on a regular basis. They also need to report to the government agencies as needed. It can be a lot more work than people might imagine. I think oftentimes, we see the scenario where the brother or the sister is a great example. Many, they're around the same age as the trust beneficiary, which could make them a good fit. At the time when the family was drafting up the trust and talking about who would serve, they are, of course, more than willing to engage in assisting with this. But when it actually comes time for them to serve, oftentimes the trust may not be funded for many years in the future. And that brother or sister may have their own family that they're taking care of and many other responsibilities that perhaps they're not able to provide the level of attention to serving as trustee as they had originally intended. It's also important to kind of point out that sometimes as a trustee, you have to say no. Sometimes, you get a request from the trust beneficiary to pay for something and it's not a good use of the funds, or it's not something that the funds can be used for in order to protect their benefits. And so that can be really hard for a family member to do. It's often easier for maybe a third party, like a professional trustee, to be the one that has to make that decision and say no when it may not be in the best interest of the trust beneficiary. And that does not have to be, a family member who has to be that person. But whomever you are considering, when you are looking to select a trustee, whether it be a family member or an individual or a professional organization or a professional attorney, we want to be sure that the individual is truly willing and committed to this responsibility. We want to make sure that you and your loved one are comfortable with this person, that this person or organization demonstrates a familiarity and empathy with the trust beneficiary, that they're willing to get to know your loved one and keep in contact with them over the years to ensure that they're always staying up to date on the needs of the beneficiary so that they're able to use the funds appropriately to meet those needs. It's a good idea to select someone who is understanding of the government benefits and keeping up on those rules and regulations regularly, to know what the trust can pay for, to be able to protect the individual's eligibility for benefits. It's also helpful if you work with somebody who is good at managing finances, who's a well-organized person to maintain records and hold on to paperwork and report to the appropriate agencies. However, it is important to keep in mind that in some cases, the individual you choose may not be very savvy with investments. They certainly still can, seek out the guidance of another professional to assist them. So it's not necessarily a requirement, just kind of keep that in mind. Also, if a family member chooses a professional trustee, for example, keep in mind that you can still appoint someone like a trust protector who kind of has the ability to oversee the professional trustee and kind of and may have the authority to remove or change trustees if something's not working out. So there's a lot of options for the family to be very involved in this process, even if they may not be serving directly as trustee. However, there are situations where that works very well. And certainly when you're using a family member as trustee, you may also have some cost savings compared to using a professional who certainly would be charging a fee for their services. So now we have an example of a situation where a person with a disability is receiving a lump sum of assets and also some funds that they may need to spend down on a regular basis in order to protect their eligibility for benefits. And this is the situation where someone may consider using a pooled trust instead of creating an individual trust. Martin has cerebral palsy and he receives SSI and Medicaid. His father recently retired and just found out that he can now start to collect disabled adult child benefits from his father's work record. He also was not aware that he was able to receive these funds, and therefore he has a retroactive payment for money that he was entitled to that he has not yet collected. So Martin is going to receive not only a lump sum of money, a couple $1,000s, that he would be able to deposit into a first-party trust. He also is going to start receiving those disabled adult child benefits on a monthly basis. So for the first time, an individual who does not work and has not really had any real sources of income on a monthly basis is now receiving payments that may accrue on a month-to-month basis as resources and need to be constantly spent down to keep him below that $2,000 resource limit for SSI eligibility. Now here's another example of a common situation, and I think for the many of care managers who are on the line, I know we at least received one question regarding Medicaid spend downs, and so we'll kind of be talking about this as well. There are situations where an individual may be receiving benefits and they do have income on a monthly basis that exceeds the income limits for Medicaid eligibility. And therefore, they're required to spend down the amount of income that they have that is above those financial thresholds on a monthly basis in order to maintain their eligibility for Medicaid services. In this example, John has a traumatic brain injury, and he received Social Security disability and Medicaid with a spend down. He recently lost his Medicaid benefits when he stopped paying his spend down to Medicaid each month because he was really struggling to be able to pay his living expenses with the money that Medicaid allowed him to keep every month. Now, the solution here is that instead of not paying his spend down and foregoing the services that he needs, he's able to deposit his surplus monthly income into a pooled special needs trust in order to regain his Medicaid eligibility so that he can continue to get the medical and dental services that he needs. And then by depositing those funds into the trust, they're no longer required to be used for medical expenses. He can now use those funds for things like his living expenses, his rent, his utility bills that Medicaid does not cover. And this is something that would allow an individual with a disability to be able to kind of have the best of both worlds, where they're able to have the benefit of the Medicaid services and maintain comfort and independence in the community for as long as possible by still being able to afford their living expenses. A first-party pooled trust is just like an individual trust funded with assets or income that belongs to the person with the disability. This is a first-party trust where an individual is coming into a sum of money or has a regular spend down issue that they need to resolve. Many of the people that you're working with are well under the age of 65. However, I think it's very important to point out that a pooled trust, as we've stated earlier, is the only option for an individual once they are over the age of 65. And this really is more primarily used by older individuals in New York State who have chronic care needs and may need Medicaid services for home care or other long-term care services. And it is a program that assists those elderly individuals to help them qualify and maintain eligibility for benefits. It is also important to keep in mind that for an individual who is over the age of 65, they are able to protect income and assets in a first-party pooled trust after the age of 65. However, there could potentially be a period of ineligibility for SSI benefits, or if the individual is older and may be looking at nursing home at some point in the near future. There could also be a penalty if those funds were deposited within 5 years of them going into a nursing home. Now that is kind of getting a little bit in the weeds for today's presentation, but if you have a situation where someone may be needing to transfer assets over the age of 65, we'd encourage you to contact a pooled trust and talk about that situation specifically to determine what impact that may or may not have on their eligibility for benefits. A pooled trust, as we mentioned earlier, these trusts are run by not-for-profit organizations, and a financial institution typically serves as a co-trustee to assist with the management of the funds. With a pooled trust, you have the nonprofit organization that has already drafted the trust document that governs the trust, which makes it incredibly affordable alternative to an individual trust, because not only are you not required to hire an attorney to draft a trust document, the individual simply needs to complete a basic application called a joinder agreement to enroll in the program. And it is important to point out that while the individual is not required to work with an attorney, the joinder agreement can certainly be filled out by the family and with the assistance of a pooled trust. We are always encouraging families to seek legal guidance when considering any type of trust, including a pooled trust. There's oftentimes many other factors at play when an individual is receiving funds. There may be other advanced directives that someone has in place. So if you have the resources to have an attorney or a legal professional involved, that's always going to be a good idea. In a pooled trust, unlike an individual trust where the funds are in a separate account on their own, a pooled trust, all of the funds are pooled. Every person who participates in the trust, all of their money is pooled into one bank account. And this is for investment and management purposes. It helps keep costs down for the beneficiaries, which makes it a very economical option on a month-to-month basis as far as the cost to administer the account. And it can also give a person the ability to really invest funds that maybe on their own wouldn't have been large enough to invest without potentially losing that money. So it can in some ways give an individual greater investment power. Although the funds are all pooled into one bank account, the trust activity for an individual trust beneficiary is tracked separately in what we call sub-trust accounts. So the money that the individual is depositing into the trust, minus any costs associated with administering the trust, is available to the trust beneficiary to make purchases. Similar to the first party individual trusts, a pooled trust is also a first party trust, meaning that there is that payback provision that Medicaid would like to recoup any money that may be left in a first party pooled trust upon the passing of the trust beneficiary in an amount equal to the Medicaid services that were provided on behalf of that individual. Now, pooled trusts are a little bit unique in this respect that while there is that payback provision, the states that allow this program, in this case, New York State, that allows this program to exist, allows the not-for-profit organization that administered the account to retain the funds to support other people with disabilities upon the passing of the trust beneficiary. And if the not-for-profit organization does not retain the funds would then go back to the states that provided Medicaid services before any other remainder beneficiaries could receive any of the funds left in the trust. Now, there are a lot of advantages that we kind of touched on throughout of using a pooled trust. Obviously, kind of the first and foremost is that cost savings and the ability to establish the trust very quickly, because it does not require a document to be drafted. Most trust programs have a nominal enrollment fee. It's typically a couple $100 to be able to establish an account. So if someone is receiving a modest sum of money, a pooled trust could be a great option. But it can also be for larger sums of money where the individual is able to maximize the benefits they receive from the funds by those reduced costs to set up and maintain the account over the years. Because pooling that money truly does help reduce the costs to administer that program, because all of the participants in the trust are kind of sharing in those expenses. And it can also increase the amount of money that someone has available to invest those funds. It also provides an extra layer of protection and advocacy for the individual trust beneficiary, because there is an experienced not-for-profit organization that is serving as the trustee, someone that, an organization that understands the government benefits and also the needs of people with disabilities and the programs that that individual may be participating in, to know what we should be using the money for and what their benefits are supposed to be providing, to ensure that the funds in the trust are only used for things that go above and beyond those benefits that they should already be receiving. And it really, any professional trustee really is going to offer the benefits of having a trusted, knowledgeable advocate whose day-to-day is completely centered around ensuring that the funds in the trust are used appropriately to enhance the quality of life of the individual. And it can also be, a good option to consider if a family finds that they don't have a family member or an appropriate person to serve as trustee. A not-for-profit organization can step in those situations and often provide a lot of peace of mind to the family in knowing that no matter what happens, someone will be there to support their loved one when they're no longer able to be there. So to just quickly kind of summarize the different types of trust that we've been discussing, we put together a nice little chart here that you can refer back to in the future when you're considering, what trust might be appropriate for the situation that you may be in. And I think that it's important, again, to point out that it's not necessarily that there really is a right or wrong time to establish a trust. It's really kind of more just knowing what the trusts are available and what the differences are between them, so that when a need arises, you know which program may be the best fit. And so, some of the questions and things that we want to ask are, who is establishing the trust? That's kind of, again, the first question every time. Do I need first or third party? Well, the first question is, who is creating the trust? Who is funding the trust? If it's someone other than the trust beneficiary, you're looking at a third party trust. If it's someone, if it's the individual's own funds, it's going to be a first party trust. And in the situation where it is a first party trust, if the individual themselves does not have the capacity to create the trust on their own, they cannot sign a legal document and truly understand what they're agreeing to, it can be established by a parent or grandparent, a legal guardian, power of attorney. It may also, in some cases, be established by court order, where someone may be receiving a large sum of money and the court directs those funds to be deposited into some form of supplemental needs trust. And it is, I think, important to point out for any family members who may be on the line that have a child that is over the age of 18, that you may not be the legal guardian of currently, you are still able to establish a trust on their behalf as a parent or grandparent, even if they are over the age of 18 and you're no longer their legal guardian. So keep that in mind. Another question you might ask is, do I need an attorney? In the situation of an individual trust where you are creating a trust on your own, you absolutely do need to work with an attorney to draft up that trust document or assist you in putting a trust into your will. Again, most commonly for a third-party trust, families are putting language into a will that would allow them to fund the trust with proceeds from their life insurance and other things that or real property or assets that they might have that they'd like to pass on to a loved one with a disability. They can also work with an attorney during their lifetime to create an irrevocable trust if they have funds now that they'd like to deposit for the benefit of a loved one. If it's a first-party individual trust, you are going to need an attorney to draft up that trust document and to work with them to submit those documents to the appropriate agencies so that the individual can maintain their eligibility for benefits. And with a pooled trust, you do not necessarily need an attorney to be involved. However, as we stated, it's always recommended to seek the guidance of a legal professional in any of these types of situations if you're able. But in the case of the pooled trust, it really is simply filling out the joinder agreement, which is a very basic application. We're asking for general demographic information about the beneficiary, what services that they're receiving, do they have a guardian in place, where is the funding coming from. It's about 8 to 9 page document that can be filled out by a family member or with the assistance of another professional or the pooled trust, and submit that to the trust along with some social security documentation. The joinder agreement does need to be notarized and signed by someone who has the legal authority to establish the trust on behalf of the individual, or could be signed by the individual themselves, and basically submit the initial funding to establish the trust with that joinder agreement. And a pooled trust can be open in about a week's time. Another question might be, do I need a trustee? In the case of an individual trust, whether it's first or third party, you are going to need to select someone to serve as trustee. That may be a person or an entity, one of those examples of the professional trustees that we've been talking about. And it's important to consider also looking at successor trustees. In the case of the pooled trust, you do not need to select a trustee. The not-for-profit organization is going to serve as the trustee of the trust. However, the family can still be very involved in working with the pooled trust to communicate on a day-to-day basis and ensure that the funds are being used for the sole benefit of the trust beneficiary. Age does come into play, as we've mentioned kind of throughout, mainly only when the individual is over the age of 65. Third-party trust is different. The money is from someone other than the trust beneficiary, so there really is not going to be an age limit there. However, with a first-party trust, an individual trust can only be funded up to the age of 65. If someone is over the age of 65 and they have funds that they need to protect, such as resources or income, after the age of 65, they would need to use a pooled trust to deposit any future funds. Again, I want to remind everyone that if they have an individual trust prior to the age of 65, they will be able to continue to utilize the funds in that account. They just can't make future deposits to that. And I would remind everyone, with any transfers of assets over the age of 65, it's important to consider the individual's eligibility for SSI benefits and also nursing home level Medicaid, if that's something that may be on the table, to just consider whether or not any transfer of assets could create a period of ineligibility for any of those benefits. And then kind of the final piece that we've been talking about, an easy way to compare some of the differences between first and third party trusts is whether or not when the beneficiary of the trust passes away, what happens to any money that may be left in that trust at that time. And in the case of a third party trust, and this is a major advantage again of funding a third party trust rather than giving funds directly to a loved one and causing them to have to create their own first party trust, there's no Medicaid payback for funds left in a third party trust. And therefore, when the individual passes away, if there's money left in that trust account, those funds can be distributed to other people within the family or whomever. It may also be that the family chooses to leave those funds to a not-for-profit organization or a charity. Many of the individuals that we work with often leave those funds to one of the ARC New York chapters that provide services on behalf of that individual throughout their lifetime, and that can sometimes be a good option. But no matter what, when the trust beneficiary does pass away, how those funds are distributed is going to be based on the trust document and what the donor, the person that funded the trust, what they intended for those funds to go once the beneficiary does pass away. In a first party trust, whether or not it's a individual trust or a pooled trust, there is that payback provision. It's the individual's own money that is going into the trust. Therefore, upon their passing, if there are funds left, the states that provided Medicaid services would need to be reimbursed for any funds according to their Medicaid lien. And then if, in the case of an individual trust, if they're able to pay that lien in full and there are funds left over at that point, those funds would be distributed according to the trust document, similarly to the third party trust. And with the pooled trust, again, in most cases, the individual who's utilizing a pooled trust has received services that amount to much higher than any balance that may be left in the trust when they pass away. And therefore, instead of the not-for-profit paying a portion of the Medicaid lien to the states that provided services, the states allow that not-for-profit organization that provides services to other people with disabilities in the community to be able to retain those funds to support their philanthropic mission and serve other people with disabilities that they provide services to through their not-for-profit. And so in this way, a pooled trust can be a really great way to ensure that instead of funds going, back to the states and the big state budget, that they're going directly back into the community to support other people with disabilities. However, I would point out, just like a first party individual trust, if the pooled trust, if there's enough funds left in the trust when the person passes away to satisfy that Medicaid lien, the individual, the pooled trust may retain a portion of the funds, and if there are funds left over at that time, they could go to remainder beneficiaries. And so I think that's important to point out. Oftentimes, people get kind of scared away from the pooled trust because they think that there's no way that any money can go to other family members. And so I think it's important to just kind of point out that process, that there are situations where that could happen. Just would have to be a very large amount of money that would allow us to pay the Medicaid lien and then have funds left over after that point. So now we're going to jump in and talk about this new tool that is available to help people with disabilities be able to save money while maintaining their eligibility for benefits. Special needs trusts have traditionally been really the only tool that allows an individual to set aside money or protect funds that they might come into without impacting their eligibility for benefits. And following the passage of the Achieving a Better Life Experience, ABLE, Act in 2014, this created another tool that allows people with disabilities to save without impacting their eligibility for benefits. These ABLE accounts are modeled after the 529 college savings accounts, and they provide another option for beneficiaries to consider. These are tax advantage savings accounts that are designed to help an individual with a disability set aside funds for qualified disability expenses. Now, there are some requirements to utilizing an ABLE account. One of the most important as far as determining whether or not this may be an option for someone that you're working with or for your loved one is that the individual who would like to establish an ABLE account must have a disability that the onset of that disability was prior to the age of 26. However, it is important to point out that the individual did not necessarily need to be deemed disabled prior to the age of 26, but as long as they can show proof that that the onset of disability was prior to the age of 26, they should be eligible to utilize an ABLE account. Deposits into an ABLE account can come from any source, and there are some limitations on how much money someone can contribute on an annual basis. There are also there is a maximum account balance of $100,000. If an individual has SSI benefits and their account exceeds $100,000, the individual could potentially see a reduction in those SSI benefits. It is the responsibility of the account holder to maintain a record of expenses and receipts. So unlike a special needs trust where you have a trustee that's kind of overseeing the day-to-day management of the trust, in this particular program, the individual account holder themselves, or perhaps a trusted individual who might be assisting them, is going to be responsible for maintaining that documentation. There are fees associated with maintaining an ABLE account. However, these fees are very nominal and certainly well worth the ability to set this money aside. These fees are going to vary by program, similarly to S&T costs of administering an S&T, which are going to be very unique to the specific program or trustee that you may be working with. There are programs around the country that administer ABLE accounts for people with disabilities. There are some programs that are in-state only, and they only provide services to account holders that reside within their state boundaries, whereas there are other programs that have kind of teamed up with different states to provide this as a national service. So I kind of point that out just to say there is a New York ABLE program, and we'll kind of talk about that as we go on talking about ABLE accounts, where the individual must reside in New York State in order to participate in that program. And then there are also programs that cross state lines and can serve an individual in any state. So I think it's important to just point out that when you're considering an ABLE account, that it's worth looking at some of the different options that may be available to your loved one or to the person that you're working with to ensure that you're selecting the program that meets their needs. An advantage of the ABLE accounts kind of over an S&T is that the money in these ABLE accounts grows tax-free. And qualified, as long as the funds are used for qualified disability expenses, these funds will not be considered as income to the individual, which would cause them to incur some tax penalties. And so that is a really great advantage to the ABLE account, that the funds that they're depositing can grow and begin to build up, which allows them to really start to create a bit of a nest egg for themselves, which they may not have had as an option previously. Now, we say that the ABLE accounts are intended to be used for qualified disability expenses. So what does that mean? Qualified disability expenses, I pulled together just a listing of some of the examples that are noted in the Social Security Administration's Program Operations Manual. I mean, these categories are very broad, really. The definition of the qualified disability is that it must be an expense that is related to the person's blindness or disability. And some of the categories include things like housing and basic living expenses, transportation, education, health and wellness expenses, maybe some training and support to assist an individual in gaining employment, paying for costs associated with assisting them with financial management, could potentially be financial management of S&T services, legal fees, perhaps if they're working with an attorney to assist them with a variety of different needs, and other things purchases such as assisted technology, personal supports and services, and funeral and burial expenses, which is something that I think people use often to help spend down funds when somebody has an issue with their eligibility, would be to use those funds for things like an irrevocable pre-need funeral arrangement. So distributions from an ABLE account, meaning payments from an ABLE account to purchase items and services, as long as they are for something that falls within these categories, they would not be taxable to the individual. If there are distributions from an ABLE account for non-qualified expenses, they may be taxable as income if the individual is audited. But I think it's important to point out that with an ABLE account, if a purchase is made for something that is not considered a qualified expense, it is a tax penalty that they would incur, and not necessarily any sort of interruption in their benefits, which I think is an advantage to utilizing an ABLE account. I also highlighted the housing and basic living expenses, and that's because while an S&T can pay for almost all of the things on this list and many more things beyond these qualified disability expenses, an S&T can, for someone who's receiving SSI benefits, is not able to provide for food and shelter expenses. And so this is where we really feel very strongly that an ABLE account really can be a great complement to an S&T, where if someone has the ability to maintain both of these and utilize both of these tools, it can really help maximize the benefit that they receive from the funds they have available to them. There are situations where someone may be in only able to live in a certain apartment because their SSI payments, that's all it will allow. But if they have a lot of money in an S&T or in an ABLE account, they may be able to use some of those funds either directly through the ABLE account or perhaps transferring some funds into an ABLE account to be exclusively used for those housing expenses, to assist someone in getting into perhaps a better living situation. However, that's really very unique to the individual, and it's important for any people who are on the line that may be serving as a trustee to keep in mind that any transfers to an ABLE account, that you make sure that you are kind of putting in proper oversight to ensure that those funds are in fact being used for that purpose, and perhaps having the beneficiary sign off on something that might ensure that you have that documentation, and to be sure that you are receiving the documentation after the fact to prove that the funds were used in that manner. So this is still a very new program, and I think a lot of people are kind of still exploring how to utilize this and to maximize the benefits available to the people that we serve. But it really does promote a level of independence for the individual who's able to be their own account holder, give them a little bit greater access to their funds, However, keeping in mind that the individual account holder is responsible for tracking these expenses and holding on to all of the documentation in the event that they need to provide that documentation at some point in the future to show what the account activity has been. This is a program that really may be best for a capable individual who can manage their own finances independently, or perhaps with the assistance of a trusted individual. It's important to keep in mind that when you have the beneficiary in control of the funds, that individual, and there's no trustee kind of serving with the legal responsibility to ensure that they're being used appropriately, there is that potential for mismanagement of funds, and there is no trustee there to, safeguard the funds from potential exploitation, where an individual may be being taken advantage of by perhaps, a friend or a girlfriend or boyfriend or even a family member in some cases, unfortunately. So to kind of quickly summarize this with a nice comparison, we kind of wanted to put together some key highlights of the Special Needs Trust versus an ABLE account, and kind of what are some of the advantages and limitations to each of these programs. And again, stress that the ABLE account really is a wonderful tool that's just another tool in the toolkit for a person with a disability to be able to protect their eligibility for benefits and maximize the amount of money that they're able to have in their own name while maintaining that benefit eligibility. And so some of the key differences, kind of in a side-by-side comparison, a special needs trust, there is no limitation on the onset of disability. It doesn't matter when the individual was disabled. So someone who was disabled after the age of 26, unfortunately, is not able to use an ABLE account at this time. And so a special needs trust really is the only option to allow them to protect their eligibility for benefits. However, if the individual's disability was prior to the age of 26, they could potentially use an ABLE account and an SNT. An SNT, an individual can have a first-party trust. They may also have a third-party trust. And in a situation where someone's over the age of 65 and they have to deposit new funds, they might also have a pooled trust. So there's really no limit on how many special needs trusts someone can have. Obviously, you really want to, be smart about it. You don't want to be paying fees for lots of different trusts. If you can kind of streamline them, that's really what you want to do. And these accounts are managed by a trustee. Whereas with the ABLE accounts, the individual can only have one account, and the account is owned by that designated beneficiary. The designated beneficiary is limited to that one ABLE account, which is going to be, which a qualified ABLE program will administer. Except in the case where an individual may be transferring between programs. There are situations where someone may move out. Let's say someone's participating in the New York ABLE program and they move out of New York State. The New York ABLE program will work with another program perhaps to transfer those funds to a program that can serve them in the new state that they live in. And so in those circumstances, a beneficiary might have an additional account for a short period of time. But it's important to keep in mind that that second account would generally not be treated as an ABLE account and could be counted towards someone's resource calculation. There is no limit on how much money you can contribute annually or otherwise to a special needs trust. The funds that are contributed, there's no dollar amount, and also they can be contributed by a first party and a third party. With an ABLE account, you are limited to a maximum of $15,000 a year is the current annual contribution limit in New York State, and that is from any source. meaning that if the individual would like to deposit their own money and then family members or parents or other loved ones would also like to put money into the ABLE account for the benefit of the person with a disability, all of those funds that are being deposited are going to count towards that $15 annual contribution limit. And so that's important to keep in mind. The ABLE account also does have, if the individual is receiving SSI benefits, if the account exceeds $100,000, they could potentially see an impact in their SSI benefits, because that's going to put any amount over that $100,000 could potentially go towards pushing them over that $2,000 resource limit for supplemental security income benefits. But for someone who's not receiving SSI, this account balance actually in New York State recently, the maximum account balance did go up to come in line with the maximum balance of the 529 college savings accounts, which allows an individual who may not be receiving SSI to really be able to set aside quite a bit of money to be able to enhance their quality of life using the ABLE program. It is also important, I think, to point out that a special needs trust can be used to protect excess resources and assets, where in addition to income. If an individual has a Medicaid income spend down, and this is something that someone had asked in the questions, someone submitted this question prior to the webinar, is if an ABLE account can help someone meet a Medicaid income spend down. Unfortunately, that is not the case. An individual can deposit income into an ABLE account. Some examples might be wages or benefits payments, again, like those DAC benefits, or perhaps they're receiving supports like child support or alimony payments. They're able to deposit the income into the ABLE account, but it is not going to protect a person's eligibility for benefits. That income will continue to be counted as income towards their eligibility for Medicaid. So if you're working with an individual who has a Medicaid income spend down, in most cases, they're actually going to utilize a pooled supplemental needs trust for that, because it is the most economic vehicle. However, if the individual is under the age of 65, they could consider using an individual special needs trust to meet that spend down requirement if they find that it's enough money that it would be worth it for them, or they already perhaps have an account with resources that they are then going to deposit their income into. And I would also point out that with a special needs trust, although many programs, particularly NYSARC's programs, we kind of separate them based on what the funding is. An individual can deposit excess resources and income into the same trust. They don't need to create separate trusts for these different types of funds. And so oftentimes we do see an individual who may start out by depositing a lump sum of resources and then find later that they now have income that they need to shelter on a monthly basis, and they're able to utilize that same program to shelter all of those funds. In the special needs trust, again, it's really important that no amount of money in a special needs trust is going to impact someone's eligibility for supplemental security income benefits, as long as those funds are being used appropriately. We cannot make a payment out of SNT for something that SSI is supposed to cover, like food and shelter, without potentially causing a reduction in the person's SSI benefits. However, it is important to point out that there are situations where someone's receiving SSI benefits, and they may decide that based on the amount of money that they have in the trust, it actually would be advantageous to them to supplement what they're receiving through SSI by paying for some of these items. And they would take that 1/3 hit reduction in their SSI benefits, because the cost benefit analysis of that is that they're actually going to receive a greater benefit by being able to perhaps pay more towards their rent to get into a better living situation, because they have the funds in their trust account to do that and can afford that reduction in the SSI. And that kind of goes back to why it's so important and what the benefits of potentially working with a professional trustee who can really understand that process and evaluate that calculation, sit down with the family and determine whether or not that would be appropriate in their specific situation. An SNT, the funds in an SNT do often grow if the money is being invested and the individual is seeing gains on that money. However, the proceeds that someone gains from any sort of growth in an SNT is going to be taxable. However, investment options with a special needs trust are typically a little bit more flexible. With an individual trust, you know, you're often very much in control and working with the trustee, whoever is, you know, providing that service to be able to make changes as needed. A pooled trust typically has, you know, a structure in place or may have some options available for different investment strategies depending on the goals of the individual. Whereas the ABLE account, the money that does grow in the ABLE account is growing tax-free, which is a great benefit. The investment options may be limited to whatever is offered by the particular program that you're in, and also oftentimes they do limit how many times a year you can make changes to those investments. But certainly you're receiving a great benefit to having those funds growing tax-free. So you kind of want to weigh the pros and cons of that. And finally, when it comes to the payback to Medicaid, in the S&T situation, as we've talked about many times throughout today's presentation, if it's first party money, there is that payback to the Medicaid, the states that provided Medicaid services. Whereas if it's money that is coming from someone other than the person with a disability, there is not a payback to Medicaid. And I think that that's important in comparing a special needs trust to an ABLE account, in that all of the funds upon the death of the beneficiary in an ABLE account, regardless of whether they are first party or third party funds, are going to be subject to a Medicaid payback during the time that the ABLE account was open. And so I think that that's really important for any parents or family members who may be considering putting their own funds into an ABLE account for their loved one. Certainly, if their loved one is going to be able to spend down that money prior to their death, there really isn't going to be much to consider. However, if it is a larger sum of money, a third-party supplemental needs trust may be a better option to ensure that any remainder funds could then potentially go to other family members or potentially children of the person with a disability that the trust was originally established for. So to go kind of back to our chart here and kind of summarize all of the different programs that we've talked about today, and also talk about kind of how to establish each of these accounts in comparison. So we have the same questions that we're going to be asking, and how do these, you know, which program might be the right fit depending on the situation. So again, who is establishing the trust? You know, is it being established by the individual themselves or a third party, perhaps? If it's an individual trust, again, it can be established by the individual themselves, a parent or grandparent. Same thing with the pooled trust. And the ABLE account is very similar. An ABLE account can be established by the individual. It may be established by a parent or grandparent or other legal guardian or also a power of attorney. I've not heard of situations where an ABLE account has been requested by court order. However, certainly I think is something we could see in the future. You know, do you need an attorney to establish an ABLE account? You know, we know that in the case of an individual trust, you do need an attorney to draft a trust document. In a pooled trust, those documents are already in place, and you're simply just applying to join the trust. where the ABLE account is a similar situation. There are not necessarily legal documents that need to be drafted. It does not require an attorney by any means. Most of the ABLE programs that are available allow the individual to begin setting up the account online. It's very simple kind of online form to get that process started. And you can also contact the ABLE program by phone if someone is either not able to access a computer, does not have internet, or just feels more comfortable meeting with somebody over the phone or in person. I'm just to share with you, I know you've mentioned in New York State, there is the New York ABLE program. The website for that program is mynYable.org. And that's really, I would encourage anyone who would like to learn more about this program to go check out their website after today's presentation, and you can look at the enrollment process there and kind of see how simple and quick and easy it is. There are, just like in S&T, situations where if a guardian or someone other than the beneficiary is establishing the trust, or I'm sorry, the ABLE account on behalf of the individual, they may need some additional paperwork. And I know in speaking with the New York ABLE program, they have resources available to families to assist them through that process. With an ABLE account, again, we do not need to select a trustee. The ABLE account is going to be managed by the account holder or perhaps a trusted individual that may be assisting the individual. And so, you know, it's important to keep in mind that, again, where you're not needing to have to go out and select a trustee, you also don't have the protections that a trustee offers in that situation. As far as age limit goes, as we've mentioned, the individual at this time must have had an onset of disability prior to the age of 26 to be able to establish an ABLE account, though I know that that is something that is being actively looked at to see if there's a way that we can expand this opportunity to a larger pool of people by raising that age limit. And just going back to the payback provision, just to kind of summarize, again, if it's a first party trust, whether or not it's individual or pooled, there will be a potential payback to the states that provided Medicaid services, where with a third party S&T, there is no payback. In the ABLE account, any funds, first or third party, will be subject to that payback during the period of time that the ABLE account was established. In addition to the My New York ABLE program, which is a program that is New York State only, I would encourage you to take a look at maybe some of the other national programs that are available, ones that operate in many different states, to be sure that you are, you know, kind of fully educating yourselves on the various features and costs associated with each program to determine what may be the best fit for you or your loved one or someone that you may be working with. And one that's pretty popular, we hear a lot, is the Stable program. And their website is stableprogram.org. And that is a program that operates in many different states, pretty much all states across the country, to provide support services and ABLE account services to individuals with disabilities. Now with that, that kind of concludes our presentation for today. We do have about 20 minutes left over to answer any questions that you guys have. So I would encourage you to go over to the toolbar if you have any questions or haven't already submitted them at this time to provide some questions that we can review. I thank you guys for taking the time to join us for today's presentation. NYSARC Trust Services has been around for a long time, providing special needs trusts to individuals with disabilities, and has served thousands of people across New York State. We enjoy being able to share our extensive knowledge with you all, and I would also highlight some information about our various programs. These are linked here if you have any questions about the services that we offer. We encourage, or any other questions as it relates to the content of this presentation or any other topics related to financial planning for people with special needs. We encourage you to reach out to us anytime. We're happy to be a resource to you. There's a question about if we establish a third-party trust with, I assume a person who's receiving SSI benefits, and then that changes to an adult receiving SSI benefits, if there are any changes required. I don't believe so. Again, the individual, it's just the goal is to protect the eligibility for the benefits. I think the difference may be that when the individual is under the age of 18, that their resources and income may be being calculated off of their parents' financial situation, whereas once they are an adult receiving SSI, then they're going to be looking at the individual who receives the SSI benefits, their income and resources. And so there, just maybe it may be a situation where that person, now that they're receiving SSI as an adult, they may no longer have, a resource issue because they don't have a lot of money in their own name. However, that really doesn't change the setup of the third-party trust. So there's a question about if someone has an ABLE account and they have wages deposited into the account, if that won't affect their eligibility for SSI. I think that's something that I would definitely encourage you to reach out to the ABLE program and ask them questions about depositing wages. Certainly that is something an individual can do, is deposit wages. I'm somewhat confused by the question because I can't think of a situation where someone would be receiving SSI benefits and have wages that they would need to protect. But I would encourage you, if you have questions specifically about the ABLE accounts, we have a very general knowledge. I have a great contact at the New York ABLE program that I'd be happy to connect anyone with, which she's taught me a lot thus far, but we certainly are just kind of covering this at a very high level. And as far as the day-to-day kind of management and impact on benefits, I would recommend that you reach out and speak to the ABLE program directly about how that may be handled. I think one of the things to keep in mind is that the S&Ts are overseen by the Social Security Administration, where the ABLE accounts are overseen by the IRS. And so sometimes there really are differences in how they're going to be managed in that way. Someone asked about the slide for comparing ABLE accounts versus S&T. That is included in the handouts area, and if you need a copy after the fact, please just give us a call and we'd be happy to email that over to you. There's a question about legal services and agencies that may be able to assist an individual who has limited income and needs advice about setting up a trust. So absolutely, this is a situation that comes up all the time where someone may be receiving a sum of money and they might not have the resources to go to an attorney and pay for those services. Although, I always am going to recommend that someone consider that as an option. There are many providers of legal services, Legal Aid Society. There are legal aid societies across the state that may be able to provide some initial guidance. There also are other organizations that may not necessarily be legal professionals, but they do assist people with disabilities in trust planning. Independent living centers, many independent living centers around the state of New York provide services in assisting someone who may need to establish a trust. And I would encourage individuals to also consider contacting, a trust company directly as well, who might be able to just provide some guidance in the individual's unique situation. But there certainly are a lot of legal services available, and many attorneys that will provide pro bono services as needed. A question about whether or not multiple deposits can be made into an S&T over time, and if multiple people, as in family members, can make deposits into the same account. And so kind of two questions. So I'm going to start with the first. Absolutely, an individual can make multiple deposits into an S&T. If somebody comes into a sum of money and they establish a trust, they're able then to continue to make deposits into that trust for any other money that could potentially impact their eligibility for benefits. So someone might establish the trust with settlement proceeds and have a large balance sitting in the trust. Then they may also be working and have wages that are accruing on a month-to-month basis that are rolling over and becoming resources that might be accruing and putting them up against that resource limit, where they be able to make regular deposits of smaller amounts of money. It may also be that later in their life they receive a direct inheritance and they want to deposit that money into the trust. Or this common situation I was talking about earlier, where the individual may establish the trust with a lump sum and then find that they have a Medicaid income spend down later on, or vice versa, where they begin using the trust because of an income spend down and then they receive a lump sum payment at another point. So absolutely, once the trust is set up, you can always continue to make deposits into it. And again, for that person that may be using a pooled trust for Medicaid income spend down, they are making deposits on a monthly basis in order to satisfy that spend down. Now, as far as individuals, multiple people being able to contribute deposits into a trust, that certainly is an option. If a family would like to create a third-party trust, it might benefit them as far as streamlining the management and also the costs for them all to put those funds into the same third-party trust for the benefit of their loved one. So certainly that is an option and something that I think each family would really consider on a case-by-case basis on what makes the most sense in their particular situation. I don't see any other questions coming in at this point, but if you do have something, I'll kind of stay on the line for the next couple of minutes in case there are other questions. I'd like to also just remind you, again, in the handouts area is the copy of those slides from today's presentation. In addition to some handouts that we've put together, one is a document that we created to assist a family member or a person who might be going to meet with someone for the first time to talk about establishing a trust for your loved one. It gives some kind of tips about things that you want to prepare ahead of time, having your information about your finances ready, thinking about what your loved one's needs are, both now and in the future, whether or not they're receiving benefits now or if they're going to need benefits in the future. And then it gives a nice kind of summary of some questions that you might want to ask when you're meeting with an attorney or a trust company, or someone who might be assisting with the establishment of a trust. We think that could be a great resource for parents to take a look at. And we also included a nice breakdown of all the NYSERC trust programs for anyone that would like to reference that. All of this information is also available on our website at nyserctrustservices.org. I did get a question about what advice or guidance we would give to chapters of, I assume, the ARC New York, who might have someone who resides in their residence that has opened an ABLE account, specifically in regards to oversight and financial management. Really, there isn't much that you can do other than, I'd recommend that you're aware that they are utilizing it, and just do your best to stay in communication with them to whatever they're comfortable with. Kind of in being sure that that money really is being used for their benefit. They may rely on you to assist them with the management of that account, and if that's the case, just ensuring that they are using the funds appropriately and keeping track of what they're using the funds for. That's kind of the most important piece, is having that documentation available in the event that they are audited and they need to produce that information. And then, again, keeping an eye on relationships that they may have to ensure that, maybe it's not necessarily someone else in the residence, but someone else who might be involved in their life, is not in any way kind of getting access to that money. And I would also kind of encourage you to, educate your residents about this program. What are the limitations and what are the things that they should really be considering, but also, helping them to understand how this could be a beneficial tool for them. I think education, and helping them understand is going to be kind of the best support that you might be able to provide, depending on your level of involvement. There's a question about taxing paperwork. What would be sent if the taxable income from the trust? So if an individual in the trust, and I can really kind of only speak to our program, and other trusts may be administered differently, we'll typically provide a K-1 to the individual to show any taxable income that they may have earned from the trust. But typically any sort of tax payment would also come from the corpus or the balance of the trust as well. And so, it's not usually something someone's having to kind of pay on top of that, but we will provide the necessary paperwork to the individual that's noted on the joinder agreement. So that may not necessarily be the ARC. It may be a family member or another authorized contact that's listed there. So if you, as either a residential facility or a provider, would like to be the person to handle that, or are responsible for handling that, just be sure that you note that on the joinder agreement that you're the individual who would receive the documentation related to taxes. So in addition to the handouts, as I mentioned, there will be an email that comes about an hour after we wrap up here. We've got a brief survey in there. We would love for you to provide us with some feedback about today's presentation. As I mentioned, We are exploring kind of new topics for the coming year. This was really, we tried to tailor this presentation so that it would be applicable not only to legal professionals, but also to care managers and support staff at various service providers and families. So try to take a really high level approach this time around. And going forward, we are planning to dive a bit deeper into this topic, talk a little bit more in depth about kind of the legal differences between these different programs, and also interested in perhaps seeing if you guys would like us to invite perhaps an ABLE program to join us to talk a little bit more in depth. Obviously, you know, my level of knowledge is really just scratches the surface. These accounts really are so new, but if that's something that you guys would like to see, we'd love to consider bringing someone in to speak more in depth about the ABLE program and really answer those very specific questions that you may have. So please, when you're filling out that survey, you know, feel free to share questions that you have, also topics that you'd like to see us cover in the future that you think would be beneficial to you or to any families that you're working with. I would also really encourage, I know a lot in the registration forms, there were a number of people that asked about Medicaid spend downs. And I would encourage you, if you have questions about that, to reach out to us. I know oftentimes it's really, you know, that the individual paying the spend down to the county is not necessarily the best option for them. However, it's sometimes you know, challenging to get all the right people to the family involved to kind of get the paperwork in place and kind of move forward with being able to protect that spend down rather than giving it to the county every month. But I would encourage you to not try and necessarily take that kind of responsibility and obligation of explaining all of the details of how this program could benefit someone you're working with. I would encourage you to have the family contact us or a pooled trust in their area that may be able to answer their specific questions and help them really understand the true value that could be provided by allowing them to be able to utilize that money rather than giving it to the county or spending it down perhaps on things that maybe they don't need. You know, might be something that they want, but when you think about the benefits of putting that money into an account that can then be used over their lifetime to really make more of an impact on their overall quality of life and perhaps save up for a larger expense or something that you know, maybe they've always dreamed about being able to do. There's kind of a mention of just like to find out more about the Medicaid spend down. You know, I think that it's something that we really specialize in. Many of the individuals that we work with are utilizing our trust program to meet a spend down on a monthly basis. That's actually was the topic of a previous webinar and something that we will be covering in depth in the future as well. So anyone who registered for today's webinar will be added to our mailing list, and we'll be sure to provide information about future webinars. But I would always encourage you that if you have questions about that program or a specific individual that you'd like to talk through, to contact our organization. All of our contact information is here on the screen. The 518-439-8323 is our main customer service line. Even during these very uncertain times, we are providing essential services to people with disabilities, and therefore we are here and we are continuing to operate. I'm very thankful to a wonderful team and the entire ARC New York family for continuing to support the individuals that we serve during this time. So please, you know, if you have some downtime, you're working remotely, take some time to give us a call and learn some more about these programs, because there are far too many people, I believe, in the population that we serve that may be not utilizing a spend down to its full potential, and in that way potentially foregoing financial means that could really improve someone's quality of life. And with that, I think we've wrapped up all the questions for today. I just want to again take the time to thank you all for joining us. I hope that you learned something new from today's presentation, and we appreciate you taking the time during this very busy time to learn more about these programs. We encourage you to contact us in the future if you have questions. And as I stated, if you'd like a recording of the webinar, please just shoot us an email. My contact information should be on the registration page, and I'd be happy to provide that documentation. So I hope everyone's staying well and healthy and has a wonderful day.